He was chasing missing persons, but then, he vanished too. Detective Mark Reynolds was one of the most respected investigators in Jacksonville, Florida. For over a decade, he had built a reputation for solving the toughest missing person cases, often going where no one else dared. His persistence and attention to detail had brought countless families closure, but nothing could have prepared him for the strange string of disappearances that began in early 2018. Within just 2 months, 5 people vanished without a trace from small coastal towns scattered around the edges of the Everglades. They weren't connected in any obvious way, different ages, different jobs, different lives, but something about the cases unsettled Mark. The first victim was a young college student on a weekend road trip, last seen fueling up at a lonely gas station. The second was a local fisherman who knew the waters better than anyone else. Then came a single mother, a retired teacher, and finally, a traveling salesman. Each case was reported in different jurisdictions, but Mark noticed a disturbing pattern in the maps, one that others had overlooked. Every disappearance seemed to draw closer to the same area, a stretch of forgotten highway leading into the swamp. Late at night, Mark would pore over old case files, looking for a clue that tied these people together. He interviewed families, studied phone records, and reviewed hours of security footage. But there were no calls, no ransom demands, no signs of robbery. It was as if these people had simply walked off the edge of the earth. Still, Mark's instincts told him it wasn't random. Someone was hunting in the shadows, taking victims with precision. The deeper he went, the more isolated he felt, as if the case was pulling him into a place few ever returned from. And he was determined to find out why. Mark set out for the old highway at dawn, his car cutting through the heavy Florida mist as the sun barely lit the horizon. The road stretched endlessly, cracked and overgrown with weeds, disappearing into the dense green of the Everglades. It was the kind of place where silence had weight, broken only by the hum of insects and the distant splash of water. Few people traveled this way anymore. It was a forgotten route leading nowhere, at least for those who wanted to come back. After several miles, Mark noticed something odd. Fresh tire tracks carved into the mud near the edge of the road. They weren't from regular traffic. The depth suggested a heavy vehicle, maybe a truck. He followed the tracks down a narrow path hidden behind a curtain of moss-draped trees. The air grew thicker, damp with the smell of rot. Eventually, the trail opened to a clearing where a weathered fishing cabin stood like a ghost from another time. Its wooden boards were grey and brittle, windows clouded with grime. Inside, the air was stifling and smelled of decay mixed with something metallic, something that reminded Mark of blood. His flashlight swept across the room, illuminating fragments of lives abruptly interrupted. A red scarf draped over a chair, a wallet tossed in the corner, and a pair of shoes coated in dried mud. These weren't random objects. They belonged to someone, maybe more than one person. Mark's pulse quickened when he pried open a loose floorboard and found a stack of photographs. The images were grainy, taken in dim light, but what they showed was undeniable. People tied to chairs, faces barely visible, some matching the missing victims. He took pictures of everything, his hands trembling slightly, and sent them to his department with a message, "Need a team tomorrow." Mark had no idea those would be the last words he ever sent. When Mark failed to check in that night, no one panicked at first. Detectives often worked long hours, and it wasn't unusual for him to stay out late chasing leads. But by morning, there was still no word, and calls to his phone went unanswered. His supervisor sent 2 officers to his last known location in the Everglades. They drove along the desolate stretch of highway and eventually spotted his vehicle parked near the overgrown path. The doors were locked, but the keys were still in the ignition, and his phone was lying face down in the mud a few feet away. It was streaked with dirt and water, but the last photo on it was chilling, a blurry image of a dark figure outside a window, the outline of a person standing still, watching. The officers pressed deeper into the swamp, eventually reaching the cabin. Inside, the scene was unnervingly clean. The floorboards that Mark had pried open were nailed back into place. The photographs he had found were gone, and so were the personal items. There was no sign that anyone had been there, except for a faint scuff mark on the floor and a single muddy footprint near the door, too large to be Mark's. As the sun began to set, the swamp turned eerily quiet. The team called for backup, and by nightfall, a full search operation was underway. Drones scanned the tree canopy while dogs combed the ground, but nothing turned up. It was as if Mark had vanished into the air. News of his disappearance spread quickly, shaking the department and the community. Mark Reynolds wasn't just another investigator, he was one of the best. And now, the man who had spent his career finding the missing had joined their ranks. The investigation shifted into overdrive as Mark's disappearance became national news. Detectives from multiple agencies poured into the Everglades, retracing every step he might have taken. They interviewed locals from nearby fishing towns, but fear kept most of them silent. The swamp had its own stories, whispered legends about people who went missing and were never seen again. When someone finally spoke, it was an elderly man at a rundown bait shop. He claimed he had seen Mark 2 days earlier, standing near a black pickup truck at the edge of the old highway. The man said there was someone with him, a tall figure wearing a hunting cap and moving with a noticeable limp. Investigators scoured traffic cameras and found one lead, a grainy image from a gas station hours after Mark disappeared. It showed a black truck pulling away from the pumps. In the back of the truck bed was a large shape covered by a top. The driver kept his head low, a baseball cap hiding his face. The timestamp placed the vehicle less than 10 miles from where Mark's car was abandoned. Then came an even more disturbing revelation. Forensic teams analyzed fingerprints lifted from the cabin before the scene was compromised. The results stunned everyone. They matched a man named Joseph Callahan, a local hunter declared dead in a boating accident 10 years earlier. His body had never been recovered, and now his prints were on evidence connected to multiple disappearances. The idea of someone presumed dead living in the swamps and possibly abducting people fueled a new wave of panic. Officers feared they were up against someone who knew the terrain better than anyone, someone who could vanish at will. And if Joseph Callahan was alive, the question became chillingly clear: what had Mark uncovered before he disappeared? Search teams spent weeks combing through the Everglades, deploying helicopters, boats, and drones in a desperate attempt to find any trace of Mark Reynolds. The swamp, however, seemed determined to keep its secrets. Thick mangroves swallowed footprints, and the dark waters concealed whatever might lie beneath. When hope began to fade, a discovery sent shivers through the entire task force. Deep in the marshland, tied to a low-hanging branch with fishing line, hung Mark's badge. It glinted faintly in the sunlight, swinging like a grim warning. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle nearby, just the badge, deliberately placed where someone wanted it to be found. For investigators, it was clear this was not an accident. Whoever took Mark wanted the world to know he was gone, without leaving a single clue beyond that small piece of metal. The swamp was searched again, but no body surfaced. Dogs picked up faint scents that disappeared into the water, suggesting a boat had been used. The case began to twist into legend. Some believed Mark had uncovered a human trafficking network operating deep in the wetlands and was silenced before he could expose it. Others whispered that Joseph Callahan, the hunter presumed dead, had faked his death to continue preying on victims in isolation. Every lead ended in dead ends. No arrests were made. No bodies were found. Years later, the official files remain open, marked by a single headline that haunts every investigator who looks at it: "Detective disappears while investigating missing persons." Families of the original victims never got answers. Neither did Mark's. The only certainty is that somewhere in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Florida, someone knows the truth, and they've kept it hidden all this time. Will this mystery ever be solved? Or remain buried in the swamp forever?